Hi, Oliver. It's nice to see people here. I've never done. Hi, Melissa. Hi. Can you hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up or something if you can actually hear me and see me. And yes, no? Can you hear me? Good. Thanks, Oliver. That's great. Right. Let's kind of start with some uh, basics while we're waiting for some more people to join if they want to. I wasn't expecting to do this today, and there are lots of people far more qualified than I am in the conference. So, with that said, I've learned, probably like a lot of trainers, an awful lot from doing things wrong. Um, you know, I think a lot of us start our training journeys with a dog that we couldn't manage, or that we couldn't get the results that we wanted to from. So, um, the first thing I would say is don't, if you're not getting the responses that you want, see that as a learning opportunity. It's not a problem, it's just a situation. And that's where we learn most. That's where we become most flexible in what we're doing and how we're doing it, and whether or not it's a useful strategy for the dog in front of us. I'm becoming very self-conscious here about all these sort of straps and silly hair and God knows what else. So just bear with me. One of the key things about working dogs and high drive dogs in general, and I know I'm speaking about Spaniels specifically today, but it's not just Spaniels, of course, it's Border Collies, it's any dog that comes from a high drive background, is that we want to establish our sense of partnership with the dog before we let them rehearse things that they're going to find rewarding in the environment. Because one of the most common errors that I see is that people get a spaniel, they think, their spaniel puppy is lovely and it follows them everywhere, and it's been really, really good at recall at 6 months old, and they know that spaniels need a lot of exercise because they're very energetic animals, and so they take an adolescent dog into the fields and they let it off the lead, and then they're surprised when it disappears for 2 hours or it heads for the horizon. And once the dog has that pattern of hunting on their own, they don't really have, it's very hard for you to top that in terms of reinforcers. So it can be done, of course it can be done, but it makes our job as trainers harder. So the first thing I would say is prevent rehearsal of the things that you don't want until your dog has a really good sense of the value in being around you, in playing with you, that most of the fun in life comes through being with you. Then you don't want to let them find that chasing rabbits on their own or chasing pheasants or flushing birds is a super rewarding activity, because you're gonna, your bit of kibble isn't going to compete with that. So that's the first thing I would say. We want to establish focus. We want to establish a value in proximity and being around us. And we want to be able to build their ability to think in arousal, because all of their hunting activities are high arousal activities. Pretty much. Sniffing is maybe the exception. Sniffing can be a nice low arousal activity. But everything else, they're probably going to very quickly get into a state of mind where they can no longer hear you, because adrenaline is up, their perception of the world narrows, they lose basically their brain is going to discard anything that isn't essential to that task of hunting there and then, which includes their owner, if you're not careful, or their handler. So focus, proximity, ability to think in arousal. And the other one I'd probably add in there is their ability to disengage from things. So we want them to be to have value in being around us. And that's the basis of your recall, it's the basis of loose leash walking, it's the basis of a lot of things that we do. But what we actually need as well, the flip side to that, is their ability to call off that bird. And that isn't just about being able to respond to a recall cue. It's about knowing, actually being okay with the idea that you can leave it and come back to it later, or you can leave it and go do something else that's more fun. It's a mental discipline more than a physical one. And so disengagement is also a skill that we have to build. I build all of these things through games. So to give you some quick examples, I would I use my dogs' food. They earn their food. They don't get bowl fed. Their food is mixed between doing training activities and games and calming activities like having a tripe stick on their bed, having a Kong, having a stuffed buffalo horn, having a licky mat or a long-lasting chew. So all of their food is working for me in some way towards what we actually want to achieve, whether that's orientation back to me or whether it's calmness on a bed. Okay, so that said, one of the key things that people say to me is, I spend all their dinner trying to get this dog to be calm and trying to get them to stay on their bed and trying to get them to be quiet in the car and trying to get them to walk calmly, and it all goes on calmness, and I never get anywhere because they stay really ramped up and really hypervigilant and super energized and really engaged in the world around them. And even when I can get them to focus on me, the minute the food's gone, the dog is looking around everywhere else. So what I would say is that you need to know the dog in front of you, really observe them, become an expert on the dog that you're working with. Breed does matter. Breed gives them all kinds of predilections and sort of hardwired tendencies or predispositions, if you like, to certain behaviours and certain activities. But the difference between individuals will always be greater than the difference between breeds. You can have one very confident spaniel and one very scared, shaky spaniel, or a super confident border collie and a very nervous border collie. And that difference is much more significant than whether they're a border collie or a spaniel. So that's one thing I would say. Watch the dog in front of you and work out what is it that really lights their fire. What is it that they really love? What do they choose to do if you give them complete freedom? Because those things are the key to you being able to reinforce your dog in a really positive way and to get them to see that the very best things in life come about through working with you. That whatever their passion, whether it's chasing things or hunting things or sniffing things out or retrieving, whatever it is that they really, really love, that not only happens with you, but through you. You're the gateway to that fun. And once you know that dog, and it isn't always easy to find these kind of passion rewards. One of my spaniels really loves, ever since he was a puppy, he's loved carrying things that are way too big for him. Okay, that is his great fun in life. For some reason, if he could steal a like king size mattress or a double bed duvet or something and drag it around the garden, he'd be in heaven. I was watching him the other day, and his statement was quite clearly, today I'm mostly going to be carrying buckets. And that's what he did. He picked up buckets wherever he found them in the garden and kind of trotted around carrying these huge clunky buckets. Now, I'm not going to be taking a bucket on a walk with me, But that does tell me that actually trying to play with a little pocket squeaker with him isn't going to cut it. I need something big and long and something that he feels a little bit outmatched by to make it a real game for him and a real challenge for him. And once I can give him that kind of fun, he thinks it's fantastic. Um, so finding what they are really passionate about and being creative in terms of how you can build that into your reinforcement strategy is a really crucial aspect of really getting kind of great real life results, because you're trying to harness the thing that your dog is most likely to go after in the environment, whatever that is. You're trying to make sure that you can import that experience into their day-to-day relationship with you, and that means that the experience that you can offer them becomes as valuable as the experience that they can find without you. Okay, so that's one thing that I would say. The other, I think, is that the idea of being a high drive dog or a very energetic dog or a working dog comes with all kinds of misconceptions from people, like that means they need 10 miles a day or 2 hours exercise, or they need so much time running off lead, or they, all of these kind of expectations that we build into it as humans. Now, my dogs haven't been, I'm going to see if I can show you them here. So those two of them, they haven't had a walk yet today. Okay, we've been in the garden. We spent about 30 seconds tossing some food around. They're completely chilled because I'm chilled. So that kind of calmness comes not from exercise. It comes from encouraging a state of mind which is appropriate to the circumstances. So the other thing I would say when you're working with high drive breeds is look at, before you ask them to do any task, or you choose training games to play with them, or you decide whether you're going to do agility today or not, or whether you're going to take them on a, beating or not, or whatever it is. Look at their state of mind. Look at what can they do in this moment. That could be, sorry, that phone is ringing, just ignore it. Can they listen to you? Do they, if you move away, do they instinctively follow you? What is their body language like? Are they super awake, lip licking, that's quite hard to say, yawning, tail up, tail down, back straight, hunched? Start to read your dog and see what level, are they whining and at the end of the leash because they're so hyped up, or bouncing at you because they're so hyped up about what they're about to do. And there are a lot of people who think, for instance, particularly in sports, that kind of high arousal is essential to what you want to do. But actually, it isn't. You don't, we want them to be switched on when appropriate. So when we're talking about calmness is really a low arousal response where appropriate. And calmness should become their default state. But we do that by making sure that we give them opportunities to be at higher arousal states as and when it's appropriate. And I think where a lot of that goes wrong is that, so I don't know at all if I'm being very coherent here. So if I'm not, please do tell me and I'll start again. If you take your dog out to do something where they're going to need to focus and they're already in a very high arousal state, that's probably going to go wrong. You're setting them up for failure, really, instead of success. So I would suggest doing a quick test of your dog's responsiveness, their body language, their ability to listen. And if they're not in the arousal level that you think they need to be to do this particular task, then you know that you need to do something with them in order to adjust that arousal level before you ask them to work. So that could be waking them up a little bit by doing some fun behaviors, you know, spinning, sitting flat, up, you know, whatever it is that you use with your dog, or doing some quick proximity games or something. Or it could be that if you've got a very high arousal dog and you want them to actually perform well, that you try and transition their arousal down. Now, that's often a lot harder than it sounds, but there are some really good tricks for doing it. And one is to remember that you have to match your dog's energy level. So if you have a very high arousal dog, asking them to sit still is going to be virtually impossible. Asking them to, if they're bouncing around, you know, asking them to, or they're looking at everything in the environment and they're twitching all over the place. A better thing to do is pop them on lead and jog with them. Zigzag, go in different directions and then alter your pace. And because you're matching their energy level, you're giving them a way of transitioning. So you can zigzag, you can circle, you can walk faster, you can walk slower, you can start to jog a little bit. And gradually, if you give it a few minutes, your dog will start to match your energy level. And at that point, they will start to lose that kind of movement from, you know, a high arousal dog typically has freeze or explosive movement. So they go from very still to suddenly very fast. What we want is fluidity. So when you start to get them into that frame of mind where they're moving fluidly with you, you know they're at a much better point for then doing whatever task it is that you're about to ask them for. And a lot of people struggle with high arousal, or the idea that the dog needs to be calm and they're feeding them and saying, but he's so upset he won't take food, etc. Use movement to bring the dog either up or down into the arousal level that you want them to have, that's appropriate to the task in front of them. And they'll find it easier to listen, they'll become more operant, they'll become much more able to learn and to think. So that's one of the things I would suggest. I'm just trying to, there's a minute or two delay on all the comments. Thanks, Oliver, that's useful. Yes. Yeah, they do walk around just carrying things and having trophies. Oliver, that's very true. I think one of the other things that I would look at is transitions, because a lot of people say to me, my dog's really good when they're working with me, but the minute I take my focus off them, they're gone. You know, they're doing something else. Or I think Oliver was saying earlier, his dog's great at scent work, but the minute he's done his job, he's off, you know? And sometimes that's what we want. Sometimes we deliberately release them to then go play, go relax, go do what you want, go play with that other dog. And that's fine. But think about your transitions. So when you put your dog on lead, I often get their attention by playing some catch games with food. As I've said, for anyone who's just joining, I tend to use their dinner to reinforce the things that I want. So they're earning their food all through the day. So when we're on lead, instead of just going straight out, we might stop and play a game in the house, or we might get to the pavement and then stop and play a little kind of can you listen game straight away. And so I'm managing those transitions and saying, okay, I know we're going out and this is exciting, but actually before we even get to do that, you need to be showing me that your focus is in the right place. And then when we go out into fields or whatever, they will spend some of their time on lead. They'll spend a small amount of time off lead, and I might call one in for a quick game of something fun and release them again. After 5 or 10 minutes, they tend to all go back on lead for a couple of minutes, purely because that's one way in which I can make sure that their arousal level stays appropriate. I've found that if you take spaniels out into the woods and you let, they're having great fun, it's fine, they're hunting, they're splashing through streams, they're picking up trails, my dogs stay relatively close to me and fairly responsive, but nonetheless, the longer they're off lead, the higher their arousal level is going to go. So if you're going to have an incident where they disconnect from you and get so excited that they run off, it's probably going to be after 30 minutes off lead. So one of the ways that I do that is that I manage that by every 10 minutes or so, I call them back in and we play a game called Picnic, where we sit in the grass and I reward for stillness. And they just get some of their dinner and I feed really slowly and they sit around me and they're still for a few minutes and then they get to go and play again. But it means that I can make sure that instead of saying, I want you to constantly be calm and constantly be next to me and constantly be managing yourself, I kind of give them some freedom and then I call them back and I make sure that I do an activity which I know is going to put them back into a listening frame of mind, and then they can go back out again. It's a bit like, otherwise I think you get into the kind of toddler at a birthday party scenario where they have so much fun that they get to a point they can't really handle it as well anymore. Does that make sense to everybody? Is this useful? Could someone give me a hint as to whether what I'm saying is actually useful to any of you? Because I haven't done this before and I have no idea what levels what level of information is useful to you. It's possible I'm stating the obvious. Now, one of the things about getting your dog to handle distractions is that, thank you, Natalie and Louise, that's really useful to know, and Nicola. The easiest way, the way that I was taught it, and my initial training all came from absolute dogs who are actually very, very good at their teaching. But the way that I was taught it, whenever your dog sees something, it's going to ask 3 questions. It's going to say, am I aware of this? Well, yes, almost always they're going to be aware of it. Is it important? Is it good or bad? So the first thing that we do to inure them to distraction is that whenever I take young dogs out, and I still do this with my experienced dogs sometimes now, is as we're walking along, we see the dustbin men collecting rubbish. I just say nice. That's my marker word. I just mark it and treat them. And we see another dog coming, mark and treat. I'm not asking anything of the dogs. I don't care what they do in that circumstance. Okay, I'm not asking them to watch me. I'm asking them to, I'm simply building a positive association between what they're observing in the environment and what happens. Okay, so that way we kind of get rid of that pessimism and that sense of that kind of instinctive reaction. This is something new, I'm not sure about it, therefore I'm going to be excited or I'm going to be fearful. What I'm doing is very calmly just saying nice. And what you find is 2 things happen. The first one is that the dogs start to become more optimistic about the things around them. They become much more tolerant of novelty. So you turn the corner, you see a big boxer straining on the lead, almost pulling its little owner over, and your dogs are just kind of, yeah, I'm okay with that. That's probably not a problem for me to worry about. So that's one thing. They also start to orient automatically back to you. Anything that is unusual in the environment or a loud noise or something they didn't expect, and they'll glance back at you, because that's what we're kind of conditioning them to do. You're the arbiter of whether this is something that we should be run screaming from or not. Okay, I would hope we rarely run screaming, but there you go. The other thing that is really useful about DMT, which is distraction, mark, treat, is that it not only sort of stops our dogs becoming aroused by the environment around them, And you're not just treating things that you think they might find scary, you're treating everything, okay? So at one point I would say, you know, if they see birds, I mean, I've got working cocker spaniels, you know, birds are their thing. Birds, rabbits, and increasingly toads, which I love having live toads brought into my kitchen. It's the highlight of my day. But they're things that they find really funny, really interesting, really fun, they want to engage with. And what I'm saying is not just this is positive, but this is actually none of your business. This is not something for you to react to. A bird squawks out of a bush, doesn't matter to us, not our business. We're here walking, or we're doing something else. And so gradually, on that scale of am I aware, is it important, is it good or bad, initially you start by addressing the is it good or bad, but very quickly your dog gets to the point where it just goes, yeah, it's not important. So I'm aware of it, but I don't care. And you will find that more and more, if you build on that, they stop reacting to things in the environment. They stop, you know, on one hand, you're doing your proximity work, you're working on getting your dog to engage with you, which is great, but they also start to not be triggered by the things around them. And that's really powerful. It's such a simple little thing to do, but where people often go wrong is that they think that they should only do it for the things the dog might be scared of, or they only do it for the things that they consider threatening or a trigger, where in fact, again, do everything to begin with, and you'll find that some dogs are indeed triggered more by some things than others. Border Collies are very triggered by novelty or movement. So bicycles, scooters, buggies, vehicles. Other dogs, cats, might all set a Border Collie off, whereas a Spaniel, it might be more birds or other dogs if they're fearful, or maybe people because they want to be loved by absolutely everyone in the world. You know, they were born for Instagram, Spaniels. But if we do everything, what we're saying to them is none of this is your business unless I tell you it's your business. Okay? And that is a huge weight off your dog's shoulders, actually. That is one of the things that really promotes calmness. Even though we don't think we're working on calmness directly, it's one of the things that really promotes it, because you're telling your dog you can just relax, okay? Just chill, because there's all kinds of stuff going on out here, but you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to micromanage everything around you. You can trust me that if I say that's our ball, that's our bird, that's our jump in agility or whatever, that's something that you and I are going to work on together. But everything else that's going on, you can just forget it, okay? And that's a really powerful thing in itself. And if anyone has any questions about DMT, or they've tried versions of it and it didn't work, I'm quite happy to discuss them later. I'm aware that I've put loads of stuff in this talk and probably far too much of it. So we'll see how we go. If you get bored, tell me, all right? And I'll shut up. So the other thing that I would say is that I don't allow rehearsal. Okay, we touched on this at the very beginning with the idea of letting spaniels and dogs with high drive off lead too early can lead to them self-rewarding and doing things that you find it hard to compete with. So one of the things that I do is that for instance, my younger spaniel, I'm just looking at saying leave it. Is it okay? Will it help with ignoring the triggers, Barbara? I would use DMT. If you're walking along and you're on lead and there is a dog that's, maybe if you could give me a bit more information about what the dog is actually doing at the point you say leave it. Here's the thing, when we look at dog training, we can come at it from like force-free dog training. Let's leave aversives and stuff aside because we're all agreed that's not a good idea. when we're looking at force-free dog training or positive dog training, we can either try to put everything on cue. So what you're doing is cueing a response. You're telling your dog to leave it because you've said to leave it. What I want is for my dogs to grow to the point where they make that decision for themselves. And I don't actually want don't stare at that other dog, or don't lunge on the lead, or don't bark at that passing truck, whatever it is that they're doing, or don't freeze if you're a border collie and you go into stalk mode. I don't want that to have to be on cue. I want my dog to be able to get to the point where they're making that decision for themselves, that they don't need to have that reaction. And so I prefer to simply build a positive association with things, and maybe use other strategies if I need to, like turning and walking the other way, removing them from the situation, which is a physical disengagement. You're saying to them, you're going to disengage, you're going to practice walking away, and coming with me is better, without actually having to put something on cue. And I think that there is a problem, particularly with negative cues, like leave it, drop it. I mean, not negative in the sense that they're bad for the dog or something, but negative in the sense that you're asking them not to do something. Do not go there, effectively. Barbara says he's a border collie and he would charge at squirrels. On lead, I use leave it if we're passing people so he won't jump on them, especially children. I would depending on the dog's arousal level when you're taking him out, if actually every single walk you're having, he would like to be lunging and jumping on people or stalking or whatever, then I would spend more time in my house, my garden, sitting on my driveway. Put a bed on the drive, and if you've got a driveway or somewhere that you've kind of removed a little bit from everybody, and feed him for ignoring people walking by. Just every time you see a kid or someone with a scooter, all these things that typically trigger border collies, you're just going to say nice and give him some of his dinner. And do that for maybe a minute and then go back in. Or do it for really short sessions, because what we don't want is for them to get hyped up just by the action of watching all these people go by. And that can happen with collies. You want to do it so that his arousal level stays relatively low. But what he's learning is actually they're none of his business. This is a game that we're playing here and now, and you're focusing on me. So it's not so much that it's a bad thing to do, or that it can't be effective in some ways, but I think you probably could go further with a different technique, if that makes sense. Take his dinner with you, and when you notice something like a child approaching, that's when you're intercepting and you're saying nice, and you're treating him, so that he's never getting to the point where he engages with them. Does that make sense? Does that help your question? Do you have any specific challenges spaniel challenges through adolescence and fear periods? Oliver, I think that all dogs can actually be fearful. I don't know if I really, I'm not sure that maybe someone better qualified to talk about this bit, but I'm not really sure whether I would think of any dog's life as having specific predictable fear periods. I think that depends entirely on their upbringing and their genetic predisposition and their personality and how they're handled. What I would say is that Spaniels are typically very sensitive to pressure. They're very sensitive to getting things wrong, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. And that can make them want to kind of be reluctant to risk forward, as someone said to me this morning. And I think that techniques like, and they can also be very, because they're not dogs who will typically, and I say typically because it does depend on the individual, but because spaniels are fairly gentle creatures and enthusiastic and sociable, they don't tend to react to their fear of other dogs with aggression, which is easier to see, it's easier to spot. But certainly when they are overly interested in other dogs, for instance, that's often, and they can't disengage and they desperately want to run up and play with every dog, but they don't really play appropriately and they get too excited. That is in a way a kind of social awkwardness. It is, in people I think would say that was social anxiety, and teaching them that other dogs are none of their business is probably the most useful thing to do. With my youngest dog, who would go off after every other dog out there and never knew, Rottweiler could be trying to eat him and he'd still be trying to lick his face and say, but we can be pen pals, right? I actually just stopped him interacting with other dogs at all for ages. We saw another dog, he went back on lead and he played with me because he wasn't actually he wasn't in a position where he could make good decisions about other dogs or interact with them confidently. And now we're at a point where if he's off leash and he meets another dog, he says hello, he might play with them for a couple of minutes and then but basically he's going to stick with me, whatever. So I kind of limited his choices until the point where he could make good choices, if that makes sense. They do not have to have, it would not have been useful for him for me to simply introduce him to lots of different dogs, hoping he'd have a good experience. That probably wouldn't have lowered his arousal levels to the point where he could actually do it properly. What he had to do was get to a point where he wasn't worried about them and he didn't really care too much because there was other fun stuff on offer. And once we got to that point, he can then play with them quite happily. Does that answer your question? And I think the other specific challenge for spaniels, like most dogs, is that they hit adolescence and they become absolute little sods who'll go off after anything and can leave you standing in the middle of a field feeling like a complete twit. And at that point, I go back to the prevent rehearsal. Use a long line. Don't let them experience what it's like to leave you behind. And if we have a glitch in training and an off-leash dog does go off script and disappear on a little hunt on their own in that, in a particular woods or field or green or whatever, then it's not the end of the world, but I don't take them back there until I'm pretty confident that we've ironed that out. I don't let them, because if you take them back to that same situation or that same environment, chances are their memory of it is going to be so strong that they're going to want to do that again. And so it becomes the place kind of reinforces the choices that you don't want. Let's see what else I was going to talk about. So what I started talking about in the post this morning that led to this talk was the idea that a lot of spaniel owners come to me and say, but she's an absolute nutter and I spend all my food and energy trying to keep her calm. And if you're not careful, you can start to become a bit of a control freak, frankly, and worry about things that aren't really very important, or I don't think they're very important. Now, I'm going to put some caveats in there. I am not a sports dog professional. I do a bit of agility for fun, mainly for the foundation skills it gives. I've never been on a shoot in my life, and I don't think I ever will. So although my dogs are taught to retrieve, I don't know anything about the finer points of, going shooting or anything. So, there are big kind of caveats there in terms of what I'm about to say. But what I would say is that if you spend all your time trying to put control on your spaniel, you probably won't get very happy results, is why I think so many people in the gun dog community traditionally use such aversive methods, because they didn't know how else to get this dog to perform as they wanted, because they were all about control. And it's not something that actually works with spaniels very well. And I think that's maybe what drove them to use such sort of, not nice methods. The much more effective way is to see that throughout the day your dog is going to go through various energy states, okay? And we actually need them sometimes to be in high arousal, sometimes we want them in medium arousal, sometimes we want them unconscious, asleep. And we need to give them practice at moving up and down that energy level, that energy scale. It isn't something that they're born knowing how to do, just like children aren't born knowing how to moderate their emotions. It takes us several years as adults as children, and some of us never get there probably, to learn how to moderate our emotions in the moment, whether that's excitement or fear or disappointment. And for dogs, it's quite, what you can do if you're not careful is set up this this kind of dichotomy between your dog being very calm and being super high arousal. You bring out food and or a tennis ball, and one of my dogs, will be sky high if she's left to her own devices. And so keep your sessions really, really short, super short. 2 minutes playing with food, 2 or 3 minutes playing a game, and then play something that's very slow and quiet, or is on lead, or is excuse me, or is about boundary training, something that is a much lower arousal and more thoughtful activity. And then maybe take them back into playing a movement game or a chasing game, and keep that play session really short, 5 minutes. I think we can sometimes, because we're working with dogs that we think of as bred to go all day, we can forget how that's still hard work for them, and particularly if we're interspersing thoughtful activities and mental challenges or learning, that all that happens if you keep going beyond a few minutes without letting them to go away and relax and kind of chill out, is that, one, you miss a lot of your opportunities for latent learning, where they go away and quiet and consolidate what they've learned, but also their arousal level will get higher and higher and higher. So what we want to do is give them short, very fun exposure to higher arousal games, but keep it really short so that then they can transition back into low arousal very easily. And I go back to my point about being off lead. Even though my dogs are now experienced, if they're off lead for 10, 15 minutes, they come back on lead, or they walk with me, or we do some figure of 8 off lead, or we do something else, because I'm constantly reminding them how to mitigate their own excitement and how to stay in a mindset which is useful and appropriate. Louise Solb says, my Springer loves watching birds. Should I stop doing that? I would certainly use DMT, Louise, but I also think it depends when he's watching. One of the other things that I would say about preventing rehearsal is, and this might take some of you by surprise, I don't know, but my dogs, even though they're experienced, we've got a big back garden with a lot of wildlife in it. They do not have time outside unsupervised. I go out in the garden with them, whether they're going to the loo or whether we're playing games, or whether I'm just going out and I'll read my book in the garden for 10 or 15 minutes and let them mooch around. But I'm there to interrupt if they're starting to do something inappropriate. They don't get to just spend ages like watching birds or fixating on something or watching the bird feeder. They used to think that the bird feeders were bait. My dogs thought it was a really ingenious idea I had to lure the birds into the garden so we could catch them. I would not allow him to fixate on something if that means that he then can't listen or can't disengage from that in the rest of the world. You're welcome, Barbara. Barbara's just leaving for the moment. If you judge for yourself, is it causing you a problem? Do you get all of the responses that you want from your dog, Louise? If you do, then maybe it does no harm at all. But if there are points where he can't listen to you, or he would rather chase a blackbird or a swallow than be with you, then I would suggest that limiting his access to watching birds and not interrupting that, or marking it in some way to show that it's none of his business is probably not helping. Probably a mistake. I would intervene and make sure that he doesn't invest too much time, because you get more of what you allow. So if birds are his preoccupation, then encouraging that preoccupation isn't going to help you if it's causing problems at other points. Yeah, if he would rather chase a bird, then no, I would not. I would be distracting, marking, treating, but actually telling him that birds are none of his business. And I would harness, and this brings us on to the other part of the talk, which is about harnessing those things that they love in other ways. Okay, so if he'd rather chase a bird, what qualities is it that a bird brings? Okay, they flutter, they fly, they squeak, they're unpredictable, there are no rules. Okay, birds don't say you have to sit down or give me your paw or turn around 3 times before you can chase me. They just get to go. The bird rewards them instantly by fluttering, squawking and flying. Okay, so what we want to do is be really exciting ourselves, bring an element of unpredictability into how you train and how you reinforce the behaviours you want. And I know I haven't spoken a lot about specific games or specific ways of training here. I'm kind of assuming that you all have your own ways of training things. But what I would say is that think about the unpredictability of the environment. Okay, how birds pop out of nowhere, how they don't have a schedule, they don't have places that they can or can't go. We need to kind of mimic some of that unpredictability in the way that we work with our dogs, so that instead of our dogs having this very rigid training schedule, and we go out and we always go to the same field, and then we sit, and then I throw a dummy out, and then I release you and send you to it, and then you bring it back to me, and then I get your tug toy out or your tennis ball and reward you with that, and it's always the same. How about you walk down the green or you walk down the field on a loose lead for a few paces, ask your dog for a behaviour, and then sprint. Okay? Run as fast as you can. There isn't a spaniel in the world that doesn't love the fact, my God, suddenly you moved, you really moved. Okay? Or be walking in one direction and suddenly whip out a toy and turn the other way and engage them in a really fast game around you of something, and then pop the toy away and you walk on. You start to build those things that the environment offers, that kind of spontaneous fun that they didn't predict, into training. And you can use some of it as pre-max, so you're asking them for something first, or sometimes just take them by surprise. Just make, I'm rubbish at running too, okay? Although I've got a lot fitter, I have to say, since I started running with Spaniels. But they're quite sweet because now they run slowly so I can keep up. But the thing is, they love the experience of it. They love the fact that you're playing with them. And that's what we, we really want to get, when they get that sense that actually you are doing the stuff that they love to do and you love it as well. That's really powerful in a training environment, because a lot of the time we build this unconscious gulf between ourselves and our dogs, where we say, I am human, you are dog, I tell you what to do, and then I will provide a very fun activity that is fun for dog. If take them by surprise, sometimes throw out the tennis ball and then race them to it. I must admit I cheat. I kind of put them in a weight, and then I throw it out and I go halfway, and then I release them to it. And if I win, I swear to God, no professional achievement, raising kids, having a house, none of that stuff is as important in that moment as the fact that I got the frisbee. I am the best frisbee hunter ever. And you'd be amazing how quickly a spaniel finds you very, very fun and interesting when you start to behave a bit more like a dog, and you have fun with it. You tease them. I mean, admittedly, the neighbours think I'm nuts, but you know what? My dogs love it. And that's where you start to really build a partnership. It's not just about giving them what they want, it's about participating. Does that make sense? It's kind of it's a difference in emphasis, really, because we think about the stuff that we do with our dogs, or the stuff we do to our dogs, and the stuff we want our dogs to do with us or for us. And I think in a way it's, if you imagine playing with a small child, they know the difference between someone who is just dutifully sitting there making sure they don't accidentally hang themselves while they're building a tower, and somebody who's actually having fun and going, no, my little car's called this, and he's going to come in and he's going to knock your tower down because it's fun. When you start to kind of unleash your inner child a little bit, kids love it. Okay, and they really respond to that, and they find playing with you so much more enjoyable. And in a way, I think we can harness the same thing with our dogs. So be unpredictable and start building your calmness through managing your arousal levels, interspersing really fun stuff with quieter stuff. And you find that they start to be more responsive to the quieter stuff because they know that it's not an end to their fun. Fun can come at any time. Fun is being with you. So all of the stuff that I would say about, putting great value in their beds at home, giving them passive calming activities, all of those things are really super important. But you can't just do that. You also have to, kick over the traces a little bit and actually have a blast with them. Find ways of identifying what they love and really going for it, and really trying to find ways that you can love that too, and you can find ways of enjoying it with them. Break down your routines, break down all those little micro triggers you have. I know you see this stuff anyway. I'm sure you're aware of all of this stuff, but all of those micro triggers that kind of precipitate and high arousal and get your dog to anticipate that something big is coming. Do a lot of non-event work, putting their harness on, taking it off, putting it on and leaving them for half an hour, putting it on, going out of the house by the back door and coming in the front door. And that's it, that's the walk. And yeah, they're going to think, you need to find a balance and be careful that your dog doesn't find that punishing because they didn't get what they wanted. I mean, do keep half an eye on that individual. But very often what happens is they just start to realise that not everything you're about to do is necessarily a high arousal activity. It's not necessarily going to be this huge thing. And with Spaniels, because they're so geared up for overwhelming enthusiasm, that's not a bad thing for them to learn. I mean, when my dogs were young, I'd get up and walk to the kitchen, it would be like, oh wow, we're going to the kitchen. Wow, we're putting the kettle on. Oh wow, we're going back to the living room. And everything we did, you'd think that they'd been, um, it was the best thing in the world ever. I mean, that's kind of their default state, that kind of instant high arousal. Let me at it. Um, and so just breaking down those triggers, doing things, popping them in the car, getting them out again, popping them in the car, going to the shops and not getting your dog out, just going and doing your shopping, coming home and then getting them out and going back into the house, so that you don't have that added level of anticipation built in. And the other thing that I would say, we've talked about transitions. I always keep certain toys are only toys you play with me. They don't have free access to a lot of stuff. As they've got older and they tend to do pretty much everything I ask of them, they have access to more things, but there are still toys that only come out when I'm playing, and they're special, and they are fun things we do together, you know. Um, Excuse me. And a couple more tips, and I'm aware that I've been talking for a really long time and probably giving you way. Oh my God, I had so many more notes. Well, we'll have to do something else if I'm not going to keep talking at you for like 3 hours. That's just not fair. But so harness what they love, build it into your reinforcement strategy. Be a bit unpredictable at it. Try and channel your inner dog. And if that doesn't sound too ridiculous, and actually find it fun running away with the tennis ball, because they're going to find it fun. They're very keyed into what is genuine on your part and whether you actually like them. It's a relationship, We can't expect dogs to be man's best friend without being their best friend back. I think that's something that people do miss. I see a lot of people walking along with their dogs, and they're lovely owners and they love their dogs, but they're on their phone and their dog's doing its own thing and they're doing their own thing, and it's just kind of, I think they're just missing a lot of fun. It's like having children and not playing with them, You're missing, you've only got so many years with your dog, and it doesn't mean that they have to always be glued to you or always be engaged with you, but you have to see having that fun together as a fundamental part of your relationship and something that you invest in. I'd also say take some time to build value in lots of different types of reward, okay? Because some dogs are very foodie, some dogs love to chase, some dogs love their balls, some dogs love tugging. I get that. And there are some dogs who will never really desperately love tugging. One of my boy will tug because I've taught it. But although he enjoys doing it with me, it's never going to be his passion, and I accept that, okay? But building flexibility in so that they do see value in retrieving different types of balls, different types of dummies, playing different types of games, running games with you, games where, for instance, when I took them out earlier, I asked the three of them to sit at the bottom of the garden, and then I ran away, called them and kept running, so they had to catch me. That's a reward in itself, that they had to, their job was like, they know the game. Or we play, we call it What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, where we creep, really slowly, charge, and we run like mad. And they're like kids, they really are kind of, oh, go slowly, we can run, and they have a blast, Be creative, build different types of reward in, because there are going to be points where you don't have food, you don't have a toy, and that kind of flexibility, it's good for you. And let's not miss that, a lot of this stuff is really good for us. Being creative in that way, being mentally flexible and thinking, what can I do here that's fun? How about we jump on the wall? How about we balance along the wall? Or how about we do some wrapping around a lamppost? Or, can you walk between my legs? There are having that flexibility in how we reward is really useful for us, super useful for us. But it's also that flexibility is really, really good for our dogs. Okay, it gives them a range of responses. It teaches them the idea that you don't always have to respond to things in the same way. It opens up a whole world of value and fun for them. But it also means that you don't get that obsessive thing. I mean, I have people saying to me, and for sure, one of my dogs was like this. She would only play with the ball that she chose. Initially, that was it. You could have you could put loads of tennis balls in the bucket and they were all identical, and she would hunt till she found her ball because it was hers. That kind of flexibility, that kind of inflexibility, isn't useful for her. And so I've worked really, really hard. It's great that she loves ball games, but I've worked really, really hard on building more flexibility into what she finds fun, because it's a healthier state of mind, and it means that she's more flexible in her learning, she's more flexible in terms of her susceptibility to reward, but she's also more flexible in just going with the flow. If it kind of generalizes to just be a more balanced, well-adjusted approach to life. Does that make sense? It's and we can talk in the threads later, if you like, about different ways to involve different ways to build value into behaviours or build value into other types of toy and stuff like that. That's fine. I don't think we've got room to go into it in great detail here. And finally, I'm going to leave you with one thought, which is about actually, I lie. I'll leave you with two thoughts. One is about dogs that prefer movement or dogs that prefer stillness. You're probably familiar with the ideas of active copers and passive copers. So when dogs get over aroused, some of them will freeze or they'll tremble or they'll hide, and others will do zoomies and lunge and bark, etc. So we should always be trying to get our dog to a point of balance. That's really where we want them, isn't it? So that they're balanced and they can respond appropriately in the circumstances. Because when you're off at an extreme of depression or mania or pessimism or optimism or whatever it is, you're not in the best place for making good decisions. You need to kind of have that sense of internal balance and perspective to make good decisions in life. And this is all about building a dog that makes good decisions and doesn't just need to be told constantly what to do. I don't want to go through life constantly telling my dogs not to chase birds, or not to chase that kid, or not to steal that child's ice cream. I want them to kind of figure out for themselves that that's not a good thing to do, because it makes my life and theirs a lot easier. So get to know your dog. If you have a dog who tends to freeze or tremble or shake, then gentle movement is a really good way of bringing them out of that. Giving them an alternative way of coping, working off their energy, finding their internal balance again. Equally, if you have a dog who is very movement based and high arousal, you might need to work between calmness in the house and boundary training or crate training and passive calming activities, and when you're outside, matching their energy a little bit and helping them through movement to transition it back down to a more appropriate level. And that brings me on to the idea of building a balanced dog, because every strength that your dog has can have a corresponding weakness. And we know this in ourselves. Very few of us are born with, absolute attention to detail, but we can also do things, broad brush and sketch. We tend to be one or the other, don't we? We tend to, all those things you do at work where they analyse your personality and, you know. Um, so we're going to have dogs who, um, some are very confident and optimistic, but they don't have enough value in us, okay? Or they have huge value in you, but you can't leave the room without them getting upset. Or they have huge value in you when you're out in the field and will stay near to you, but they don't have the independence and the confidence to go a long way to do a retrieve. Or, you know, you can see that there's a flip side to all of these abilities. One of my spaniels called Archie, his full name is Archimedes because even as a puppy, he was such a thoughtful dog and a little problem solver. And that can make him amazingly gritty. It's fantastic. You know, he has, if he's motivated, he has tremendous perseverance at solving problems. What's the flip side? He finds it very, very difficult to walk away from a problem he hasn't solved. So for me, it's great. I love that grittiness. Now I need to teach you how to disengage. So we spend a lot of time building his ability to disengage. On, you know, for some dogs, they can be very, very pressure sensitive, very sensitive about failure. And one of the things we need to remember as positive trainers is that the minute we start rewarding a dog for doing things, we also implicitly set up the possibility of failure. And some dogs become aware of that remarkably quickly. You know, that, well, hang on, but what if I get it wrong? And we've all been there, you know, that's a very, I find that a very relatable state. So we need to encourage those dogs that actually, you know, by setting them up for success, by playing lots of no rules games, things like orientation game, you know, throwing food out, and all they have to do is go get it. And then when they bounce back to you, because you're the one that threw the food, you're going to mark it and throw another piece. There aren't actually any rules. You're not telling them what to do. You're not, if it takes them 5 minutes to find the food, well, fine, that's all part of the game. You know, go with it. Give them opportunities to win and to work in a world that isn't just constantly about control and rules and calmness and doing what I want you to do. This is a world in which I meet you and I try and fulfill your needs as an individual in the same way that I would hope we would if we went into, you know, a classroom full of learners. We'd be saying, well, okay, some people are really good at maths and some people are really good at English and some people are neurodivergent, so they need some different strategies for working. We try to meet people these days on their own ground. That's what we need to do with our dogs, is to give them a fulfilling, reinforcement-rich world in which we are noticing the things that they love and their passions, and we are thrilled for them and participate in them. And out of that, we can also take them on a journey to focus and to calmness and to addressing the things that they're maybe not so good at. I'm going to stop there because I could talk all day about this stuff, but I really hope that's been useful for you. I'm so sorry that I've spoken for more than an hour. I didn't mean to. But if anyone has any questions, then please shoot them to me. Just tag me in a post or something and I will do my best to answer. Thanks a lot, guys. It was lovely to talk to you. Bye. How do I turn this off?